A shipping manifest, not a press release. Somewhere in a rack, a chip is running a language model with 100 billion parameters. The chip's blueprint belongs to no single company. No government issued it. No government can recall it. That chip is the XuanTie C950, and for the past decade, building something like it required renting an architecture from a landlord who could change the locks whenever the political weather shifted. ARM and Intel were those landlords. China was the tenant. And then the eviction notices started arriving. The notices were polite at first, then they weren't. The arrangement looked stable until it looked catastrophic. That is not the real story. The real story is what China read in those letters every single time one landed. A precise diagram of the dependency it needed to eliminate. A ceiling, it turns out, is also a floor plan. What I want to trace here is how a series of architectural lockouts became, inadvertently, a set of directions toward the one design no one can revoke. ARM licenses its instruction set to chip designers. That license is a contract, and contracts have counterparties with leverage. When export controls began threatening the renewal of that license for HiSilicon, the chip division linked to Huawei, the implications landed hard and fast across the entire Chinese chip industry. The x86 story followed a similar shape. An earlier arrangement that gave a Chinese entity access to x86 came with explicit restrictions on what could be built and for whom, a matter of documented export enforcement. Building a factory on leased land is the cleanest analogy here. The machinery is yours, the engineering is yours, but if the landowner decides you've breached the lease, every piece of equipment you bolted to that floor becomes useless overnight. No factory, no chips, no leverage. So what happens when the eviction notices pile up? You stop looking for a more lenient landlord. You look for land that nobody owns. Haigon, whose lineage traces back to that restricted x86 arrangement, built the XuanTie C950 on a completely different foundation. Reduced instruction set. Computer, the fifth major iteration, was developed at the University of California, Berkeley, and is now governed by a non-profit foundation incorporated in Switzerland, with members spread across the United States, Europe, China, and dozens of other countries. The specification is published. Any engineer anywhere can implement it. No single government controls the foundation. No single company holds the deed. The Western instinct was to treat architecture licensing as a ceiling, something you raise or lower to control what a competitor can build. But a ceiling is also a floor plan. Every threatened license told Chinese engineers exactly which dependency to eliminate next, and the one they landed on happens to be structurally immune to the mechanism that threatened everything else. The difference between ARM and this open instruction set is the difference between a recipe locked in a restaurant vault and one printed in every library on Earth. You can be barred from the restaurant. You cannot be barred from the library. Now here is where the skeptic in me slows down, and I think it should slow down yours too. The claim that the C950 runs 100 billion parameter models comes from Haigon's own materials. No independent lab has published a benchmark on this chip under real sustained inference load at the time I'm writing this. A chip that handles a task in a controlled demonstration and a chip that handles it in a production data center running continuously are not the same chip yet. That gap matters enormously. 100 billion parameters, if each were a grain of rice, would fill roughly 40 Olympic swimming pools. The claim is that this processor handles that workload on an architecture that is legally immune to export control targeting. That is a very large claim, supported at this point by one very interested party. The node compounds the uncertainty. A 5 nanometer chip from a Chinese firm raises an immediate question about where it was fabricated. If it was made at an advanced foreign foundry before tightened controls took effect, that window is now largely closed. If it was fabbed on a leading domestic process, the density and yield characteristics are not equivalent, and for workloads that are as power sensitive and density sensitive as large model inference, that gap is not cosmetic. I can tell you the reported node, I cannot tell you the fab, and neither can most analysts I've read. There is a third constraint the open instruction set does not solve. Designing any advanced chip requires electronic design automation software. The dominant tools in that category come from two United States companies, and those tools are themselves subject to export controls. The instruction set being free does not make the design pipeline free. China has made substantial investment in domestic alternatives here, but the gap between those tools and the leading commercial options is real, and is underreported in most coverage of this story. So here's where I land. The C950 is real enough to take seriously and unverified enough that I won't tell you it outperforms a comparable ARM Neoverse core. What I can say with confidence is that the strategic logic does not depend on this specific chip winning a benchmark. It depends on the direction being irreversible. China's participation in the open instruction set community is not casual. Reports tracking open-source hardware contribution volumes describe China as the most aggressive national participant by contributor count. That is not enthusiasm, that is strategic accumulation, and the Foundation's governance documents make explicit what no single government can do. Expel a member nation, revoke an implementer's rights, or modify the published specification to create a trapdoor. Those protections are structural, not political. They don't depend on goodwill. Each time a Western architecture threatened to vanish, it revealed the precise shape of the dependency that had to go. HiSilicon and the ARM license uncertainty. Hygon and the x86 field restrictions. Two different architectures, two different enforcement mechanisms, one consistent message. Any blueprint you rent can be taken back. The response, accumulated across roughly a decade, was not to find a better rental agreement. It was to move on to land the deed system doesn't cover. The landlord model of chip architecture assumed that whoever held the deed held the power. China got evicted often enough that it stopped competing for the deed and started building on land where the deed system does not apply. The XuanTie C950, verified or not, confirmed at 5 nanometers or close to it, is the first physical artifact of that bet at serious scale. Whether it performs as claimed matters for this quarter. That the architecture behind it is permanently outside the reach of any export control matters for the next decade. ARM and Intel didn't lose a customer. They trained a competitor. And unlike the chips they sell, that education cannot be recalled. Every eviction notice was addressed to a tenant. The C950 is the first letter sent by someone who no longer rents. The wall didn't stop them. They used it to find the door. The question I want to leave you with is this. If the instruction set architecture is the last layer of design that export controls can reach, and China has now moved past it, what lever is actually left? Tell me in the comments what you think the next real choke point is. And if this kind of granular, no-hype breakdown is what you come here for, subscribing is how you make sure the next one actually reaches you.